We are all in some form of pandemic lockdown. We continue to experience pandemic impacts as unemployment numbers remain high. With many Americans unemployed or underemployed, there is a huge threat that many will not be able to afford expenses such as utility bills. With the coverage pictured on the first map, most, if not all, customers were protected from disconnection in May. Switching to where we are now on the map on the right, Arkansas and Kentucky are the two Southeast states with moratoria on power utility disconnections that are still in effect. With Arkansas Governor Hutchinson's extension of the state of emergency issued on October 13th, the moratorium was extended through December 12th. On September 21st, the Kentucky PSC extended the disconnection suspensions through December 31st. In addition, some Southeast utilities are waiving late fees and holding off on disconnections. For example, Virginia utilities were allowed to resume disconnections on October 5th, but Dominion is allowing customers to pay back their bills over the next 12 months. What other utilities are holding off on disconnecting customers even though their states have lifted mandates? Please let us know in the chat box. Next slide, please. Legislative sessions shifted to virtual formats, and those that were postponed have all now adjourned. The last legislature to adjourn was Mississippi on October 10th. 2021 legislative session dates are provided in the appendix of this slide deck. The earliest sessions will be beginning January 12th. If you are able to join us for our webinar in May, we updated you on what legislation was passed and what has stalled. Since then, many legislatures have resumed and completed their legislative sessions. Here are some updates on topics of interest. There is still no movement on the Georgia proposal to create a demand-side management study committee, or on the South Carolina proposal to create a committee to study the sale of state-owned Santee Cooper. On the other hand, Mississippi has paused several pieces of legislation on pandemic recovery focused on increasing equity in distance learning through funding and broadband support. Also on the right for things that have passed, in September, South Carolina Governor McMaster signed legislation to create the Electricity Market Reform Measure Study Committee to explore the feasibility of the state establishing or joining a regional transmission authority. The committee will be comprised of utility representatives, customers, and industry and advocacy groups, and will also study the feasibility of enabling retail electric choice and achieving emissions-free electricity generation. Now on to elections and appointments. There are several changes to public service commissions across the region that we would like to highlight. In Alabama, Twinkle Kavanaugh is up for re-election as president of the 3-member commission and is being challenged by Democrat Laura Casey. In Georgia, both districts 1 and 4 are up for election. Incumbents Jason Shaw and Bubba McDonald are challenged by Robert Bryant and Daniel Blackman, respectively. Voters in Alabama and Georgia will select their commissioners in the November 3rd general elections. In Florida, in August, Governor DeSantis appointed state legislator Michael LaRosa to replace Donald Pullman on the commission, with a term starting January 1st. In Mississippi, Governor Reeves appointed state legislator Sally Dottie to the position of executive director of the public utilities staff. In South Carolina, after the process was delayed due to the pandemic, the state legislature appointed 4 new commissioners whose terms began September 24th. The new commissioners are Carolee Williams, Mike Caston, Hedon Thomas, and Delton Powers. Look out for our upcoming post-election highlights for more information on elections and legislation. Next on to regulatory updates. Regulatory proceedings have resumed and all states have adapted stakeholder engagement practices to allow for virtual participation. You can find information on updated practices and procedures in the appendix section at the end of this slide deck. This is a regional recap of some ongoing regulatory proceedings. In terms of rate cases and integrated resource plans, rate cases in these states are currently underway. In Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Several utilities and regulators are considering how to handle cost recovery related to costs incurred during COVID-19. Additionally, Dominion and Duke are currently in their IRP cycles. Concerning energy efficiency rules, this summer in Florida, the Commission approved demand-side management plans for all 7 utilities regulated under FECA, the Florida Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act. Additionally, the Commission initiated a process to update the EE rules authorized by FECA. In September, the Louisiana Public Service Commission issued a notice of expansion of scope in the EE rulemaking docket. The goal is to explore alternative administrative changes to support the cost-effective and transparent rulemaking and implementation of utility EE policies and programs. Talks about establishing a Southeast Energy Exchange Market, or what would be called SEAM, are underway. We are anticipating Duke filing at the North Carolina Utilities Commission in October. This is a month before the proposed FERC filing by Southern Company, Dominion, and Duke in mid-November. That is a roundup of general rulemaking that is occurring in our region. Next, we will discuss how utilities and program implementers have adapted to changes in energy efficiency programs and operations. Working with utility representatives and implementers of energy efficiency programs, SEIA has been collecting information on how these programs have been impacted during this time. We projected that certain programs were paused or adapted, but wanted to understand how utilities in our region are modifying program offerings. Through several conversations, we found 2 general stages: short-term program suspensions or alterations, and long-term program adaptations that are likely to stick after the pandemic winds down. Many in-home energy audits have been paused, but some utilities have resumed audits with virtual tools. Many utilities are shifting their focus to deliver home EE kits and to improve their online marketplace offerings. For some, empty buildings provide an opportunity to shift workers from performing in-home inspections and installations to vacant offices and schools. Next slide, please. We surveyed our partners to sample what is going on around the region. What we see is reflected in the following numbers obtained from 13 utilities we surveyed. The results of our survey found that a majority of utilities had paused several of their energy efficiency programs. Of the utilities with disrupted programs, 1 is not operating any EE on-site programs, 5 have partially resumed programs, and 7 have fully resumed programs. We asked how utilities in the region are adapting programs to current circumstances. 3 said that they have new programs, 8 have adapted their programs to the current situation, and 4 have made no changes. One of the most significantly impacted programs were low-income weatherization programs because they were issued guidance to pause all in-home audits and installations. We found that the virtualization of audits and increased rebate offerings through online marketplaces are likely innovations that are here to stay. We also learned that utilities are still striving to meet targets set before the pandemic and are working with regulators to manage expectations and to reconsider evaluation methods. Next slide, please. Workers in the field are continually adjusting as they respond to updated public health guidance. Our partners are requiring all on-site employees to wear face masks, as it has proven to be the most effective measure of preventing the spread of COVID-19. An additional common precaution is to minimize points of contact by not rotating contractors and creating small teams who work together on various projects. You can find much more information on safety precautions from our partner, Building Performance Association, at building-performance.org, link presentation that we will provide at the end. Now I'll hand it over to Anne for updates on energy efficient transportation program and policies.
Thank you so much, Claudette, and good morning to everyone. It is a pleasure to join you today. I'm going to start off and kind of go through state by state updates on what's going on in electric vehicle utility and state program updates, as well as some charging company updates. As we shared on our last webinar, the electric transportation sector has fortunately been able to move forward pretty well with many of the efforts and programs that they had already planned or creating new plans in spite of the pandemic. So that is really good news. We did see some delays in decisions and with industry updates. However, as I said, things are moving forward. It's really exciting time in the electric transportation space. So from a national perspective, in the first half of 2020, there's been more than $1.5 billion in utility investment. $1 billion of that came specifically through announcements from both California and New York, and around $60 million from the rest of the country. And since the summer, however, there have been some slowdowns in those large announcements, but I don't think that's a clear indicator of really where the industry is. In each state of our region where we are most focused, we have seen good progress. Florida has been particularly busy. As we reported in the May webinar, House Bill 7018 was passed. And since that time, the Florida PSC, Department of Transportation, and the Energy Office, so glad to see Kelly here today, have been working to identify and set up a structure for the development of a state EV master plan. Later this week, in fact, tomorrow, the PSC will be holding a workshop on the plan. The Energy Office also is in the final stages of development of a state EV charging infrastructure roadmap, and the latest draft of that is currently open for public comment. If you want information on that, please feel free to reach out to us directly afterwards. Florida Power and Light has proposed and is seeking approval of 3 new electric vehicle tariffs. And Governor DeSantis has announced the release of millions of dollars of the Volkswagen settlement funds that will support expanding charging infrastructure along major corridors in Florida and electrifying fleets. In Virginia, Dominion Energy launched a $20 million program that will provide rebates for charging stations for multifamily communities, workplaces, transit bus depots, and fast charging locations. These rebates vary between $2,000 and $50,000 per project. This program is called the Smart Charging Infrastructure Pilot Program, and it was approved by the State Corporation Commission as a part of their grid transformation plan. In South Carolina, the Utility Commission approved a program proposed by Duke Energy for additional charging infrastructure, notably DC fast charging infrastructure as well. And for those who don't know or just getting into the EV space, when I refer to the DC fast charging, that's basically the fastest charging that's currently available to charge electric vehicles. In Alabama, Governor Kay Ivey announced additional funding that had been approved through the Rebuild Alabama legislation that was passed last year that calls for supporting additional charging infrastructure in the state through the general fund and the education budget, as well as huge manufacturing incentives for the state. In North Carolina, we continue to await a decision by the North Carolina Utilities Commission on Duke Energy's proposed $76 million EV pilot. In Tennessee, Drive Electric Tennessee is working really closely with stakeholders on the implementation of the state's EV goal, which is 200,000 vehicles by 2028. And they've released numerous requests for proposals as a part of their Volkswagen settlement funding to transition vehicles to electric. They've also, through the work groups of Drive Electric Tennessee, have been developing some instructional videos that will help local guide decision makers on EV program opportunities. Also in North Carolina, the governor's office joined several other states, around 14 other states, in signing a memorandum of understanding for the transition of 100% of medium and heavy duty vehicles by 2030. That will have such a huge impact on advancing electrification of that sector. In addition to the utility charging programs, utilities have announced goals to transition their own fleets to electric. Duke Energy announced a goal to transition 100% of their fleet to electric by 2030, and Southern Company recently announced that they'll be transitioning 50% of their fleet by 2030. Of course, this does not capture the entirety of the programs or news over the past few months. It really has been super busy. It's just, yeah. So if you'd like additional information on other programs, feel free also to reach out on that. Next slide, please. On the charging front, projects approved prior to the pandemic have moved ahead, and we've seen additional new investments and partnerships. Greenlots, a member of SEIA, has partnered with Volvo in a collaboration between 15 public and private partners to develop a blueprint to introduce battery electric trucks and equipment into the market at scale. ChargePoint has raised more than $127 million to expand infrastructure by more than 2.5 million stations by 2025. EVgo, also a large charging company, is expanding and announced the addition of 2,700 new charging stations by next year. In Georgia, Georgia Power, along with Pivot Atlanta, which is part of the Cox Automotive Mobility family, they opened the largest DC fast charging installation in the Southeast, just south of Atlanta on Metropolitan Parkway. In addition to Duke's program in South Carolina that was approved, the state announced a new plug-in South Carolina program that will help standardize EV signage to help drivers find charging stations. And of course, Electrify America, which was set up as a part of Dieselgate, Volkswagen's program, they've opened numerous charging depots all over the region over the last several months. Next slide, please. Also, we are pleased to share that regionally, a new Southeast EV partnership has been set up. This is being led by folks at Georgia Tech and the Nicholas Institute at Duke. This initiative brings together multiple stakeholders to share best practices and coordinate in support of the expansion of electric transportation in the region. Also, 9 state energy offices that includes Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, and Tennessee have set up an ET information exchange to collaboratively look at opportunities in their states to advance EV adoption, charging infrastructure, and economic development opportunities. Next slide, please. All right, so that's it for me. I'll turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Anne. And we are ready for our first poll question. We wanted to kind of get an idea of how you guys were operating, working 8 months in. We know that things have probably changed since we last chatted in May. So our first poll this morning is going to be, what's keeping you from business as usual, sorry. And I'm going to launch right now. The options are that we set out are public health measures and restrictions, internal organizational policy, i.e. health and safety measures, reduced consumer demand, or maybe you're operating at normal business levels, and then other. You can add comments in the chat box, and you can choose any that apply here. All right, looks like we've got everybody who wants to answer so far. And so I'm going to end polling and go ahead and share the results with you guys. Looks like of those who answered, public health measures and restrictions seem to be the top reason to keep us from business as usual, which I think probably makes sense for most of us. And then followed by a lot of y'all working at normal business levels. In the chat, we've also got Kristen from Apton saying that customers postponing investments until next year or beyond, so you're not able to complete work this year, which is certainly makes sense. Thank you, Kristen. All right, well, with that, we're going to move on to our next section. We're going to talk more about the energy debt crisis, and we're going to start again with Claudette.
Thanks again, Sarah. In our last webinar, we discussed how utilities and regulators were using lower than normal natural gas prices to provide relief to ratepayers. SEIA is in the process of tracking new trends in how utilities are responding to customer debt. If you have any more information, same as before, about states requiring COVID-related reporting, please let us know in the chat. To help the sector in pandemic economic recovery efforts, some utilities are enhancing programs to offset unpaid bills. Some utilities are leveraging charitable contributions, and many are offering bill payment assistance. Here we have some examples from the region. Huntsville Utilities in Alabama is supporting customers during the pandemic by forgiving late fees and launching a relief fund with the Tennessee Valley Authority. Similarly, Georgia Power is leveraging money from their charitable arm, Project Share, to help pay bills and avoid disconnections. Knoxville Utilities Board lifted its disconnection moratorium policy yesterday, October 19th. They are working with TVA to assist customers that may not be able to afford to keep their power on. Armed with $4 million in bill payment assistance and a flexible payment plan program, they will try to assist those in need. In addition, some states are using stimulus funding to provide customer relief. In North Carolina, Governor Roy Cooper wants to alleviate the economic strain of the pandemic on families by pledging $175 million to help pay for rent and utility bills. Stimulus funding such as the CARES Act also increased LIHEAP funding and has been used to supplement assistance. This is just a sampling of utility sector economic recovery efforts around the region. If you know of any similar stories, please add that to the chat box, as we have mentioned before. To conclude, COVID-19 has affected how and when programs were delivered, and it has emphasized how great the need is for energy efficiency programs. Whereas I talked about energy insecurity from the perspective of the utilities and regulators, I'll hand it over to Maggie, who will discuss energy insecurity from another perspective, from residential and small business viewpoints.
Thanks, Claudette. My name is Maggie Kelly, and I'm the Built Environment Project Manager at SEIA. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're seeing, the crisis go further than just energy debt, beyond arrearages, but more into a chronic stressor of energy insecurity. And SEIA uses the definition of energy insecurity to mean where people are struggling to maintain vital energy services like heating and cooling. And what you actually see here on the screen is a series of graphs of data that is for our region of the Southeast in yellow, and you see the other regions and the variations of gradients of blue, of what energy insecurity looked like before COVID-19. So that's before 2020. And these are in the millions. So we've got 15.4, the largest share of million people or households in the Southeast experiencing any energy insecurity. We've got 7.5 million households receiving disconnect notices, the largest group of folks in the nation reducing their consumption of food or medicine to pay for energy. And then 5 million households struggle to maintain a healthy indoor temperature. So these are just some of the data points, some of the understandings of how energy insecurity and struggling to maintain vital energy services, and sometimes going without other vital needs to maintain energy services are showing up in the region, and that's before COVID-19. And the reality is right now, we don't know a whole lot about the data, and may not know for some time about how COVID-19 is or moving around these numbers. What we do expect to see, though, is that the implementation of disconnection moratoria and some of the programs that Claudette just highlighted will prove helpful for thousands across the region in understanding and limiting and lowering that energy debt, and potentially buffering some of that energy insecurity and making households more secure in their energy needs, as well as some of their other insecurities that they are experiencing. But as many of those disconnection moratoria have ended, or some programs are coming to a close, we're recognizing that there are households that are within the gap, that are not having support with energy debt or ongoing energy insecurity in our region, and are not currently getting the support that they need. And we also understand that we may be moving into a cooler season, similar to the mild spring that we had. So we may see a reduction in energy residential use, but at this point, it's unknown. And we also may continue to have high heat days. I know here in Atlanta, it's supposed to be in the 80s this week. So we may not have quite a mild fall the way that we had a mild spring. Of course, then it is unknown. I think it is really critical to think about as whatever weather comes our way this fall and winter, to be prepared to support our customer populations who are being made vulnerable by the pandemic and may have little to no relief or support. So Sarah, if you'll change the slide for me. As we are collecting and analyzing the data that's on the ground, as we're thinking about the programs that are being implemented by states, by utilities, and other decision-making bodies, we're asking ourselves some questions here at SEIA, encouraging our partners and all of those who are joining us today to think about these three bigger questions in the work that you're doing and in the strategies that you're setting. So what have we learned from effective programs and policies during the moratoria or during the last 7 months to increase energy efficiency in residences? So with the programs and policies that we've used, how can we really understand how to now input energy efficiency in those places? And if we had policies and programs in place to help struggling households during this time that had energy efficiency involved, we upgrade those and make energy efficiency more prevalent. Secondarily, what are the barriers to the long-term implementation of programs and policies that we saw in the temporary programs in the last 7 months? So those more on shutoffs or bill payment programs or whatever it may be that a state, municipality, or utility we're using, what is stopping or holding us back from doing those long term, and look at those barriers and understand how we may be able to move around them or help each other over them. And lastly, how can we keep the residents that are struggling with energy debt in the loop, engaged in participating in energy efficiency programs? Now that we have and probably have more customers or more residences that are enrolled and struggling with energy debt, struggling to pay bills, and we are expecting and looking at that expand as we reach potentially a colder season this winter, how can we make sure that they're engaged in our energy efficiency programs that we're already offering? And so these questions are at the forefront of our minds, and we hope that you'll add them to your lists as well. Shifting to the commercial and industrial conversation, it's really important to think about small business and commercial business impacts, because we know energy debt doesn't exist just for households throughout our region. We know that many commercial spaces are operating fully, as most of the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions have shifted in the Southeast. Businesses that operate in commercial space with employees who are able to work from home are still operating. So those buildings didn't just completely go offline. A lot of them are operating in what many building operators consider weekend mode most of the time. Though there are some firms and some organizations that have returned to the office with safety protocols and maybe even alternating schedules, offering similar energy usage to years previously. However, what we don't know is how small business and commercial businesses are keeping up with their energy bills. So what we do know is that roughly 1 in 5 small businesses have closed in the last 7 months, which means 4 out of 5 are still with us and still hanging strong. But what we have found is that the number one reason why many of these businesses have closed is the struggling to pay rents during the COVID-19 era. And one can infer that if the rent is not affordable because of impacts to the small business, the energy bills would be causing an additional burden, right? And while we do understand and we do know that many small businesses and most businesses throughout the nation have been able to secure the Paycheck Protection Program or PPP loans, many of those loans and that support and those benefits have gone to solely support payroll. So they've gone to keep the economic recovery and development going by putting dollars in employees' pockets, though those dollars then don't go to rent, energy bills, or other overhead costs that may be involved in running your smaller commercial business. And so many small businesses are actually working largely with landlords to make deals to stay alive in the COVID-19 era, because we're not seeing a lot of eviction or small business moratoria, right, or rent relief or help throughout our region in the Southeast. Sarah, if you'll continue one more. Thank you. And so what does this mean on a larger scale? Our built environment team at SIA is really working to understand the landscape of energy security in the Southeast. Over the last 7 months, we've recognized that we don't know all that we can know around the data and information for how the households, the individuals and businesses are experiencing energy insecurity in our region, and then what we can do as practical policy solutions and programs to help tackle those things. So our team is developing a methodology to better understand energy insecurity, focused presently on the residential side of the data, though the commercial and small business and manufacturing is on its way. This framework really keys into a multitude of variables that go past energy burden and start to explore the depths of energy insecurity as a whole. And what you'll see on the screen here on your left is a multivariate map of the Southeast region that SIA serves, and a focus in on percent of energy burden for low-income households and percent of minority population in the region. And this is one of the many, many ways that we have looked in and worked with this data that we're finding in order to understand who is being impacted by energy burden and where that is showing up in our region. And then on our right, you'll see a map of Memphis, Tennessee, and it's actually a similar multivariate map that actually looks at the prevalence of energy burden for low-income households in Memphis, and collaborated with the prevalence of pediatric asthma. And so not only are we just looking at the demographics of how and where energy insecurity are showing up, but what other outcomes, what other braided problems are existing in the Southeast, like pediatric asthma, which can be tied to mold, pests, etc. in the home due to faulty or inefficient energy systems, and helping states, the region, cities better understand the issues as they exist on the ground in their area. And so we open an invitation to everyone on this webinar and your and friends of friends to go a bit more in depth in this data with us. And with our built environment team to get a better idea of not only the regional level, but also the local landscape and potential interventions that anyone on any level that's a decision maker can make. We are exploring how understanding energy insecurity has an impact on the populations that we serve and how energy efficiency can be an effective tool in tackling those issues of energy debt, energy burden, and energy insecurity as a whole. So if you're interested in seeing more of the methodology, more of the data, more of all of it all together, please reach out and let us know. We'd be happy to share with you and co-create the process. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Maggie. We have another poll question for you guys. So now that we're hearing about how business is going, we want to know what would help you get back to business as usual. Let me go ahead and launch this poll for you guys. The options here are advances in health and safety or enabling operations despite COVID, additional economic stimulus, supportive energy efficiency policy, or perhaps you're of those who are operating at normal business levels, or if there's other you want to add in the comments, please go ahead and do so. Thanks. All right, it looks like most of you guys have voted. So I'm gonna share our results now. And it looks like overwhelmingly advances in health and safety. So enabling operations despite the pandemic would be our top choice. And then followed by additional economic stimulus. And of course, I think we're all on the same page here supporting energy efficiency policy. So I'll close this and then we're gonna get going with our next section. We're going to talk about the economic impacts to the energy industry as a whole. We'll start again with Claudette to talk to us a bit about workforce. Claudette.
All right, thanks. In a survey SIA conducted earlier this year, we asked, has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted your utilities' energy efficiency workforce? If so, what percentage of your workforce has been affected by reduced hours or job? Here are the results. Of the 12 respondents, 8 said that they experienced zero or minimal impacts on workforce or third-party implementers. 4 felt less than 50% of the workforce had been affected. No one felt that more than 50% of their workforce were negatively affected. Okay, on to the next slide, please. The results of our sample study are reflected in a collaborative report published by BW Research Partnership and E for the Future COVID-19 Economic Crisis Clean Energy Jobs Report. The report's scope is national. The following are some highlights of the Southeast states. The US lost over 477,000 clean energy jobs from March to September. You can see here that the highest losses in terms of number of jobs in the Southeast were in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. Let's look at job losses on the next graph. As a nation, job losses in the clean energy and energy efficiency sectors increased almost 14% since the pre-pandemic era. You can see that most Southeast states are above this national average for job losses, with the exception of Arkansas, Tennessee, and Virginia. Let's look at a little positive news on the next graph. But things are starting to look up. In September, the rates of clean energy job growth are back in the positives, with North Carolina currently leading the region. Moving on to the next graphs. The next graphs compare job losses and job gains tracked by month. It is a bit hard to decipher, so we have displayed the data in two separate graphs. In the first one, with the information presented by state, we see that Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina experienced the greatest losses in April. And Florida and North Carolina gained back the most jobs in June. Let's look at it in another way. When viewing the information by month from March to September, we see jobs are still being added to the workforce. June is when we see the greatest amount of job gains across the region. From July through September, we see small but steady increases in jobs in SEIA's 11 states. These numbers are total clean energy jobs, not specific to EE. It is important to note that the report states the sector naturally experiences a slowdown during this time of the year. These data reflect some resiliency in the clean energy sector, but show that the pandemic has made a profound impact. E for the Future has put together some of the stories behind the numbers that we have linked in the appendix. There you will find personal stories about ways that the EE workforce has been resilient in these trying times. Similar to our stories on utility adaptations, energy efficiency professionals are finding workarounds such as virtual trainings and minimal or no contact building retrofits. I'll hand it over to Anne to tell us about what is happening with the energy efficient transportation industry.
Great, thank you again, Claudette. So yeah, as Claudette mentioned, going to provide a little bit of update, mainly now on the automotive industry. We've covered a little bit of charging and the utility plans as well as state plans, but where are automakers? We really are waiting for these cars, and that will have a huge impact on how fast electric transportation grows. As we shared back in May, most US automakers shut down for about 2 months. And that has slowed plans a little bit, but following that brief shutdown, production resumed for most manufacturers. As sales are moving forward, as you will see here, that dip there over on the right-hand side, we saw those dips, but the story really is not consistent across all manufacturers. Tesla continues on a steady upward trajectory. A lot of that had to do with deliveries of their Model X as well as their Model Y, which is their new small SUV. Next slide, please. And Rivian unveiled the delivery vans that they will be providing to Amazon. That's around 100,000, an order of around 100,000 delivery vans. This Michigan manufacturer is expected to release the first electric pickup truck in 2021 as well. Sarah, can you move on this slide a little bit? I think there's several pieces. Thank you. Mercedes also announced a massive $1 billion investment in high voltage EV battery technology in Alabama. General Motors, Ford, and other automotive manufacturers plan increased EV production, which will further increase the variety of electric vehicles, which we all need. We need more options for more types of consumers. Arrival. They are a company that's primarily made delivery vans and trucks. They announced a $43 million investment to build a micro facility in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And then SK Innovation, a battery company that built its first facility in Commerce, Georgia, announced another facility that they will be building in Georgia as well, which will add thousands of jobs in that sector. Next slide, please. Forecast still looking up, as you can see here. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, battery electric vehicle sales are forecast to be 1.7 million by the end of this year and increase to 8.5 million in 2025, 26 million in 2030, as well as 54 million by 2040. Also, nationally, California Governor Newsom announced a ban on the sale of gas vehicles by 2035. While that's not in the Southeast, this will have industry-wide impacts in terms of bringing more EVs into the market. Next slide, please. Here's a snapshot of a few of the electric vehicles we are going to see on the horizon very soon. And as I've mentioned before, diversifying the types of vehicles that are available to meet more consumers' need is really important. So a few of these just to point out: Ford Mustang Mach-E, that's actually an SUV. Then of course, Tesla's Cybertruck, Volvo, Audi e-tron, and Nissan Ariya, small SUV. These are exciting new vehicle models we're going to see coming. Next slide, please. And then I wanted to share, there's a few key reports that actually have been released over the past month. One is came out by Cox Automotive Mobilities Group. They had surveyed EV drivers. And then they most recently surveyed them since the COVID pandemic, and they found that 55% of buyers are more interested in EVs post-COVID than they were surveyed prior to. And there's a lot of things that go into, why that is. It's, learning more about vehicles, Tesla's continued improvement in the industry. And, I think we're beginning to have some significant penetration in our education and awareness efforts. So this is really promising to see that more consumers are growing interested in this technology and think it could be one of their next cars. The next slide. Yes, wanted to just highlight too is last month in September, as we do every year, we celebrate National Drive Electric Week. Of course, we aren't able to do as many of the ride and drives, get in a car with others and test them out, but people were able to be flexible and find alternative ways to do it. Some folks have done smaller events, as you'll see here, to adapt to these times. And we were involved in a virtual event focused on educating people about the technology, and that is available. If folks want to check that out and learn more about what's happening in the Southeast. So I think that's it for me for now. But, the bottom line is things are looking very positive, and now it's really, important to ensure that policy and the programs that are developed can support all people and encourage that investment. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Anne. That was a fantastic presentation. It's great to hear that the electric vehicle world is still on the up. Additionally, the construction industry is on the up. And we talked about this in May. Construction had been deemed critical in a lot of places, even where construction was maybe for a moment due to putting in new public health guidelines and making sure that the workforce was safe. Even if most construction was halted, construction of affordable housing was deemed as an essential business, which is very promising for the housing prospects in our region. But since May, what we found is that really, other than the holdbacks about additional safety protocols, the largest issue was really supply chain, making sure that enough materials to construction sites, and that has largely solved itself as most of the supply chain issues around manufactured goods have returned. But as construction stays afloat, the buildings departments stay busy in our region. As we mentioned in May, virtual inspection, as Claudette mentioned a little bit earlier, utility program inspections and processes have gone into place across the US, specifically here in the Southeast. And virtual processes look different from building department to building department, but what we do know is that on the large scale, they're going well. But we are getting reports and recognizing that virtual in the setting doesn't always mean more efficient, as we are working through what's actually the best way to get the information for an effective review process and inspection. What we have been hearing on the ground is that inspections are taking up to twice as long, depending on who's on the other side of the technology, right? Inspectors know what they're looking for when they enter into a commercial or residential building. And if there is someone who's not an inspector, right, or not trained in the eye of mechanical, plumbing, energy codes, and knows what to look for, it can take a little bit more time in directing the folks on the other side of the camera to make sure that we're getting full understanding of what's actually happening in the guts of buildings throughout the Southeast. Now, pre-COVID-19, SEIA was leading the charge in the Southeast to train and educate building departments in including and prioritizing energy efficiency in reviews and inspections. And don't worry, that hasn't stopped. It's still a large part of what we do today. But you can imagine with the longer and more tedious inspections, energy really just not rising to the top with mechanical and structural and plumbing codes, right? And so it's really important to note that there hasn't been an increase in staffing or resourcing in the building departments in the region, even with an increased workload. It's also important to note that there's still quite a few building departments that have not gone the virtual route and remain using either the paper processes that they're used to and on-site visits with health and safety precautions, as they refer to no contact inspections. Many of these types of inspections are still also taking more time than normal. One department here in Georgia reported that while they're remaining with in-person inspections, they take a little bit longer because the properties have to be vacated a certain amount of time before they enter. And that reduces risk of transmitting any virus or coming into contact with anyone on the job site. And it's really, as we dug in and really talked with a lot of the building departments in the Southeast, the reasons that a lot of them have either stayed on paper or kept in the process of in-person and on-site inspections is because of the lack of resources, whether it's the lack of time to be trained on virtual pieces or to effectively move everything and everyone over onto a digital platform, or to the resources to buy all the equipment that would be needed for a virtual inspection or virtual review process, or the staffing to up that process because of the lengthy the increase in time that it would take to go through the virtual process. And so it's really important to understand that the industries are doing well, that we're seeing new housing, new commercial buildings and retrofits to all of these buildings in the Southeast, but we're still seeing quite a bit of need around the energy training, energy focus, and then really just resourcing our building departments as a whole. And so, Sarah, if you'll change the slide for me, I'll next talk about the economic impact to commercial buildings. And so talked a little bit earlier about commercial buildings staying in weekend mode or maybe even returning to some of the same use, depending on if people are able to work in the building or not. But what we have learned about load and economic impact of these buildings and these industries is that most of the impact has not really seen much of a difference in energy use intensity, especially when it comes to industrial buildings, but instead in the product type or what the business is creating. So if it's producing a good that's doing well and essential, say something like toilet paper, there may be even an increase in energy use. But if it has lower demand, maybe the industry is not deemed as essential at the beginning of the pandemic, there may be not a whole lot of change in that usage, energy usage, or may even be a little bit of a decrease just because of the markets. Though what is encouraging to hear is that many of these industries that maybe weren't producing essential goods at the beginning of the pandemic have really shifted their businesses. We're seeing hand sanitizer coming from businesses that maybe never produced something like that before. And so we're seeing really these industrial facilities still using a good amount of energy, kind of year over year, about the same. Now, what's really encouraging to hear about our commercial buildings is that manufacturers or building owners and operators who have not already been working to improve the energy efficiency of their buildings are starting to look more in that direction. So whether that is the control systems and energy management systems of the building, it's HVAC retrofit, or heat pump water heaters, whatever it may be, there's a lot of attention to saving every penny, every dime that's absolutely possible to save. And many are realizing that energy efficiency retrofits are the way to go to really achieve those dollar saving results, which is a great sign for our industry. And so as I wrap up the content portion of this webinar, it's a good reminder that energy efficiency is a solution that many are seeking right now. And whether it's to save energy, to save dollars, or create a safer and healthier home, business, locality, or just to evolve as an organization. The folks on this webinar, so all of you who have joined us today, are the experts in our region. And there are people who are looking for you, your strategies, your solutions, your policies, your expertise. And as we at SEIA continue to monitor the landscape of energy efficiency in the era of the COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully soon the post-COVID-19 era, we know that you all will be at the forefront of the transformation. And we're grateful for our partnerships with you. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you and see if you can take us to our last poll question.
I could not have said that better, Maggie. Thank you so much. And in that vein, our last polling question is, how long do you expect before normal business returns? I know there's not a lot that we can probably accurately predict right this minute, but in your planning and in your thinking, when are you guys expecting to go back to normal? The options here are under 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, more than a year, or other. All right, it looks like most of us have answered the question. So I'm going to go ahead and end and share our results. And it looks like most of us are thinking 3 to 6 months or 6 to 12 months. We all hope sooner rather than later, I'm sure. So now that we've ended the polling and into the content part of the webinar, I'm going to move on to just some resources and upcoming events that we've got going on for SEIA. So we will obviously put this recording together for you guys and the slides. And I think Claudette especially mentioned several times an appendix where we'll link all of our resources and some different materials for you guys that relates back to the presentation. So we'll send that out to you after the webinar. And then coming soon for events in late October, we're gonna have a revamped COVID-19 resources page. It's going to be archivable, so you'll be able to look up what has previously been posted, and we'll highlight workforce, economic impact information, news that we're reading related to COVID-19, and then highlight any regional solutions that we think are fantastic. In mid-November, we'll be delivering our election highlights, which Claudette also mentioned earlier in the webinar. And then finally, December 8th through 10th, we'll be hosting an event series that we're just sort of returning the What's Next event series right now, where we're going to be talking to you guys about how do we build it back better? How do we use energy efficiency as a tool for regenerating economic opportunity in the South, and what that might look like for all of us. So with that, I'm going to hit back here for some Q&A. And we would love to hear from you guys. Go ahead and put any questions you have in the chat. Get started. I'm going to go ahead and ask a question of my own to kick us off. And I was also really excited to hear about how well the EV market is doing. But I wanted to know what, if any, are the barriers to this possible growth?
Well, that's a great question. And I think there are a number of factors. We really need to be growing the number of vehicles while also growing charging infrastructure, and the dependability of charging infrastructure is key to building consumer and driver confidence. And so what we really need is to see an embrace by utility commissions and state leaders to support productive policy that will increase vehicle adoption. So whether that's through, incentives, rebates, and that sort of thing. And also and also the commission supporting charging infrastructure by utilities. I think that's really important to ensuring the success of this industry. And then also preventing bad policy. As we've seen over the years, some very punitive, for example, electric vehicle fees. EVs are probably what's going to be a norm, but there are some fees that are truly punitive to getting people in the vehicles. That's fees that are $150 and higher. One of the innovative things that Alabama did, although I do think their fee is a bit on the high side, but they are directing a portion of that funding to charging infrastructure. And I think those sorts of policies are good to support the industry more in the long term. So supporting positive policy and ensuring we don't get bad policy passed.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, I have a question from Maggie. Are y'all seeing any conversation around trying to improve health outcomes related to buildings?
Yeah, no, we are, and we're seeing those conversations not just come from the ground and folks who are involved in energy efficiency, but also from departments of public health and public health advocates, and the same way that we advocate for energy efficiency, they're starting to understand that energy efficiency and embrace that we are a part of the solution set in the health conversation. So much so that we're also seeing the conversation coming from funders. So whether that's private philanthropy funding or funding from the Department of Energy, the EPA, and from HUD are all had funding opportunities available now that are looking specifically at health and health outcomes tied to buildings. And so it is definitely something that's being talked about, particularly understanding how energy systems can help the health of the occupants of the buildings, because if buildings aren't for occupants, what are they for, right? And so making sure that buildings are actually helping keep people safe and healthy and not causing harm. And so that is encouraging to see, and we're hopeful that we'll see more of that, particularly in the region, and continued work, projects or policy to kind of really focus in on health.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Claudette, we've got a question for you. What is the next step anticipated in the Louisiana energy efficiency rulemaking docket?
So we expect the commission staff in Louisiana to issue the phase 2 proposed rules, and that will be on November 24th.
Great, thanks so much. I've got another one for Anne. Could you speak a little more to the increased interest in EVs over the course of the pandemic? I know you addressed some of that before, but we'd love to hear some additional notes.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, I think, our awareness efforts, education and outreach are really starting to pay off. People, are able to spend some more time learning about the technology at home. We're also seeing, Tesla stock. And, they're kind of known as the premier, electric vehicle provider, just continue to do well. We're seeing increase in charging infrastructure and signage that's available. So, it's a really, a confluence of different factors, I think, that are all sort of converging. And then, there were a lot of investments and goals that were set pre-pandemic, and folks are able to really continue to begin the implementation of those. The pandemic has not really affected what those proposals were. So I think a lot of it's, had kind of built up, and it's just sort of, some of these things have sort of been rolling out during this time period, and not directly tied to the pandemic itself, but things have been put in motion prior to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed that a couple of folks are off mute. Does anybody want to ask a question as opposed to put it in chat? Just wanted to put that out there in case there were some brave folks. That's okay if you're not. It's all good. I'll ask one more question for Maggie, and then we'll move on. Maggie, are building standards part of the discussion on steps to reduce energy insecurity?
Always. So this is a large charge of the energy insecurity landscaping work that we're doing. We understand that there are going to be multiple solution sets that can be employed by states, utilities, organizations such as ourselves and others to tackle energy insecurity. And we know that the better the energy code, the less an energy bill will be in a home. But we're understanding and trying to make sure that the existing building code or renovations or weatherization, those building standards help increase the energy efficiency of the home and therefore lower energy bills, and hopefully has a positive impact on reducing energy insecurity as well. So yes, building standards are always a part of the conversation about reducing that energy insecurity, but even more so now. We are closing most of our conversations and kind of processes building code development in the Southeast. We still have a few processes open in Arkansas and in Nashville, Tennessee, as well as Alabama. But as we move forward and we see more opportunities to discuss building codes and standards, especially around energy efficiency and increasing energy efficient building standards, this will be one of the largest data sets and largest data conversations into why energy codes and upgrading our energy standards is vital to increasing not only really the economic development or the economic, space of the Southeast, but also, the health outcomes, like I showed with the Memphis map with asthma, but also some of the other variables that we're starting to look at here at SIA. And so, as I said before, if anyone's interested in our energy and security landscape, we are happy to book some time with you and share that.
Thanks so much, Maggie. I appreciate that. Thank you all again so much for being here. We did have one more quick thing to share with you guys. We always like to let you know kind of what we're doing behind the scenes at SIA. Oops. So I'm going to share our isolation creations. I hope you guys have seen this hashtag on social media, kind of what we're all creating while at home. We have some hidden artistic talent. We've been getting outside, painting, home office upgrades, pumpkin garden helpers, and homeschooling. I'm sure you guys are all in the same boat, but wanted to share that fun tidbit with you all. Thank you again for being here. You're the reason that we do this. And we hope to talk to you soon.